himself the damage that had occurred. Obviously, he was not here. He was in Germany and arrived just 2 days ago to the country. So yesterday he took a stroll down into the devastated area, but a single person did not support him. Everybody shouted at him that we don't want you because you're part of the political establishment and we want all of these people out of power. Now, of course, Adib is now the prime minister designate. He has to do something, and the international community has no choice but to back him. Although the important caveat here, or the criteria, is to make sure that all the assistance is very much controlled so that he does not get ahead of himself and be part of the corrupt system that is constantly generating crisis after crisis for this country. Imagine that during the past 100 years, this country has known 2 wars, 2 invasions, destruction galore, and it's not even over yet. The Lebanese are tired of all of this. They want a new system. Will a new system be created? Macron promises that he will in fact see to it that there is a new system in place. Will the Lebanese allow him and the international community to actually create a new system? That's the challenge ahead of us. Yeah, hopefully they will succeed.
Joseph, I know so many thoughts are out for the Lebanese people to do that. Thank you so much, as always.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, the head of Australia's foreign cyber intelligence agencies says there are good reasons to spy on some of us. The Australian Signals Directorate largely focuses on tracking foreign communications, but that role is slowly evolving. Its director, Rachel Noble, says it is able to track Australians overseas who are committing crimes like espionage and terrorism. Here's Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts.
Historically, it's very rare. For 30 years or so after it was formed in 1947, ASD's existence wasn't even known. It was a highly classified secret. Now, over the last few decades, that's changed, and slowly, ever so slowly, the organisation, along with other intelligence agencies, has been edging out of the shadows. And that process really sped up about a year or so ago when Mike Burgess, who used to be the head of ASD, now the head of ASIO, ushered in a bit of a new era when it came to the media. He's been giving a number of speeches. He even invited the ABC into the ASIO headquarters a few weeks ago in an unprecedented move. So things are moving and shifting a little bit in this front. Now, the reason for that? Well, these intelligence agencies have over time been given more and more powers, and so perhaps there's a feeling inside the agencies that the way to deal with that is to explain themselves a little bit more to the Australian people. As for Rachel Noble's speech today, there were no great surprises in it. Perhaps you'd expect the head of an intelligence agency to defend the need for secrecy. Nonetheless, she made that case, saying Australia's capabilities had to be kept secret from its adversaries. And she also said that there were some good reasons for ASD, which primarily focuses on intercepting foreign communications from overseas powers. There were nonetheless, she said, good reasons in limited circumstances for it to spy on Australians overseas if they were contemplating serious crimes. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
I'm sorry if this is news to you, but not all Australians are the good guys. Some Australians are agents of a foreign power. Some Australians are terrorists. Some Australians take up weapons and point them at us and our military. Some Australians are spies and who are cultivated by foreign powers and are not on our side.
I think there is a desire inside these agencies to explain to Australians what they do. Perhaps what's also informing that is this increased public debate around espionage, around the powers that are granted to spy agencies, and in particular the way that those powers have been magnified in the online era. Now, ASD, the government has made it clear that it wants to expand its remit slightly. It wants to be able to draw on its expertise to allow police to actually prosecute Australians here in Australia in rare circumstances. On top of that, it's been made pretty clear that it's going to take a greater role protecting critical infrastructure here in Australia from foreign cyber attacks. So as the ASD's role evolves and it moves out of the shadows and away from operating purely overseas to take on a semi-domestic role, at least tangentially, perhaps the new Director General feels like she has an obligation to tell Australians exactly what it is and what it does.
Australia's 17 million Facebook users could soon be blocked from sharing news on the site as the social media giant muscles up against proposed new legislation. The government wants to force Facebook and Google to give Australian media companies a cut of their digital advertising revenue. And it says it won't be deterred by bullying and coercion. Here's Jay Norman in Canberra.
This is world leading.
He's written his own headline on a story about saving news journalism as we know it.
Nothing less than the future of the Australian media landscape is at stake with these changes.
But heralding an assault on the world's biggest tech titans was always going to be an uncomfortable place to stay, as Josh Frydenberg's discovering.
Hey Google.
A month ago, he unveiled a regime to make Google and Facebook pay Australia's commercial media companies when their news content's placed on the two global digital platforms.
Bringing the world closer together.
But digital empires aren't built on giving up money because governments tell them to. Facebook's threat, a news ban, or in its words, to reluctantly withdraw the ability of publishers and people in Australia to distribute news on Facebook and Instagram. Google's made similar threats about services the search giant provides for free. So who's bluffing whom?
We won't be bullied, no matter how big the international company is, no matter how powerful they are, no matter how valuable they are.
But their popularity gives Facebook and Google enormous power. 19 million Australians use Google search every month. More than 17 million access Facebook, slightly fewer on its picture-rich platform Instagram. And not just for searches and social catch-ups. A third of Australian consumers get their news from these behemoths for free, which makes for digital destruction of the advertising market traditional media companies thrive on. In 2018, Google Australia scooped up $3.7 billion. Facebook, just under $2 billion. Just how much of that ends up in the hands of commercial media companies is subject to negotiation. The government's dismissed Facebook's threats as coercion. Equally, the tech companies appear determined not to roll over and set a costly precedent for other countries to follow. Something we'll have to give.
India's former President Pranab Mukherjee has died from a lung infection weeks after testing positive to COVID-19. The 84-year-old served as president from 2012 to 2017. But a corruption scandal 2 years into his leadership saw his Congress party lose the general election. The former leader had been in a coma after testing positive to the virus after brain surgery before the lung infection resulted in septic shock. India had reported the biggest single-day jump in coronavirus infections of any nation during the pandemic, with more than 79,000 cases. The South Asian nation recorded just under 70,000 new infections yesterday. Let's get more on this story. I'm joined by co-editor of Quartz India, Itika Sharma, who joins us out of Delhi. Itika, thank you for your time. How will the former President Mukherjee be remembered?
Well, he will be remembered as a prominent statesperson. He had a political career spanning 5 decades, during which he served as the finance minister several times. He was awarded the highest civilian order award last year by Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, who called him an outstanding statesman of our times. Most politicians in India are remembering him. He died at the age of 84, and most of his professional life he spent as a politician in India with the opposition party, the major opposition party right now, the Indian National Congress.
And it appears as if he may have been a casualty of COVID-19. As you pointed out, he was 84, but the numbers are terribly high. The biggest single day of any country was recorded on Sunday, over 79,000. Why are the numbers so bad?
So Mukherjee had been hospitalized because of a blood clot in his brain, and after the surgery, after the procedure, he tested positive for COVID-19, but the reason for his death is said to be a lung infection, a sepsis caused by a lung infection. As far as the COVID-19 cases in India go, well, in August, we reported 2 million cases, which is a global record for the number of cases. The number of deaths also surged in August. It was a 50% jump over July. Why the number of cases are increasing mainly is because the economy has been opened. We were under lockdown in the months of towards the end of March and then in the months of April and most of May. But that took a big hit to our economy, which is why most businesses have been reopened. And once that happens, people start coming back to work, and that sort of, the physical distancing, maintaining physical distancing then becomes harder, which is one of the primary reasons why the number of cases is going up.
How are people responding? Are they angry with the way the government is handling it? I mean, as you pointed out, there was this very tough lockdown, yet it hasn't really had any benefit in terms of trying to suppress this virus.
Well, there is a lot of fear, a lot of anger, a lot of agitation. A lot of it also stems from the fact that despite reopening the economy, things are not looking very good on the business side. There have been estimates that say there have been 4.1 million youths who've lost job in India because of COVID-19. Just yesterday, we had our GDP numbers, growth numbers come in, which show that in April, June, there was a negative 24%, the worst contraction in recorded history. So a lot of angst stems from all of these things because there's a straight ramification on family incomes. As far as the number of cases rising goes, India is a very densely populated country. You have a lot of people who live in sort of arrangements where they share common infrastructure, like bathrooms, or some people who live together and watch television together, etc. So in those circumstances, it is really difficult to maintain social distancing. So the number of cases going up is not, of course, the numbers are shocking, but it is something that one would anticipate in a country like India. But the frustration stems from the fact that the government is really not doing enough to help people, to make the healthcare system stronger, or to offer better amenities to the people who have been affected and their families.
And are people deciding to try and isolate themselves? Or are they trying to sort of live in little bubbles and in fact not go back out and spend money and get involved in the economy again?
That's exactly what's happening right now. So the government-mandated lockdowns have mostly lifted. They only are there in certain red zones or pockets which have higher number of COVID cases. But in general, most things are allowed. But from what we see, people are not really stepping out. Markets are still mostly deserted. People are not going to the malls. People are sort of self-isolating, trying to stay indoors, and online deliveries have really caught up. People are ordering from their basics, like groceries and daily dairy, etc., to other lifestyle products, etc. Everything is being ordered online. People are trying to stay away from exposure. Almost nobody is traveling, which is why the tourism industry in the country is having a really hard time. But there is frustration towards the government, but also, at least in urban areas, we see that people are trying to do whatever they can in their capacity to ensure that they stay safe and their families and their folks.
Itika, appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
The archaeological site of Mycenae in Greece has had a lucky escape after fire threatened its ancient monuments. 4 water-dropping planes and 2 helicopters helped dozens of firefighters contain the blaze. Despite blackening the entrance to the 3,000-year-old citadel, authorities described the damage as only aesthetic. It's even scheduled to reopen to visitors today. The Bronze Age city was a major centre of Mediterranean civilization, flourishing centuries before Athens's Acropolis monuments were built. A naval ship has been decommissioned by a group of nations taking part in military exercises in the Pacific. 10 countries, including Australia, worked together to sink the ex-USS Durham as part of the biannual Rim of the Pacific. The Navy says the exercise allowed participating units an opportunity to gain proficiency and confidence in their weapons through realistic training. Well, tonight's What in the World, and last night it was a cougar in the kitchen. Tonight it's a North California supermarket with a bear helping itself to groceries. Shoppers found it calmly perusing the aisles of the Kings Beach Safeway. This time it left empty-handed. Obviously nothing took its fancy. The bear is apparently a frequent shopper, visiting the store a week earlier and leaving with a bag of tortilla chips. Perhaps like all of us, it's just looking for the bare necessities. Our top stories tonight on The World. Pro-democracy activists are calling for a boycott of Hong Kong's COVID-19 testing blitz, suggesting DNA could be collected and misused under the cover of testing. Beijing is staying silent over the arrest of Australian journalist Cheng Lei. And South Korean prosecutors have laid fresh charges against the convicted heir of the Samsung empire over his role in a 2015 merger deal. Well, Victoria has recorded 72 new coronavirus cases. Now, that's the lowest daily increase since early in July. There were also 5 deaths. The Premier says 2 separate plans are being developed to slowly ease restrictions, one for Melbourne and one for regional Victoria.
There's no good doing this too fast, opening up too much too quickly, only to be open for just a few weeks and back in lockdown by Christmas time. We don't want that.
But authorities are worried the drop in case numbers may be inaccurate. There has been a decline in testing. In August, up to 40,000 people a day were being tested. Now that has dropped to just 10,000. Australians stranded overseas by coronavirus are continuing to battle cancelled flights and exorbitant airfares in their efforts to get home. A group of parents in London are taking things into their own hands. They're hoping to charter a plane so they can introduce their newborn babies to family back in Australia. Here's Nick Dole.
Meet 4-month-old Callan, 4-month-old Ailish, and Charlie, who's just 7 weeks old. They're just a few of London's lockdown babies, and now their Australian parents want to introduce them to their families back home.
You're being robbed of so many just incredible memories of her that you want to share with your family and you can't. This is my daughter Ailish.
When Kylie McCrossan posted this video to social media, she soon realised she wasn't alone.
Outside of all of the babies that we'd like to take home, there are so many Australians still in London at the moment who can't get home.
Australia's caps on international arrivals have turned air travel into a virtual lottery, with thousands of passengers competing for the right to return. Melbourne's not accepting any arrivals. Sydney only allows 350 per day, while Perth, Brisbane and Adelaide each have a weekly allocation of around 500. So Kylie McCrossan's started a campaign to fill a charter flight with young Australian families.
65 people registered, so that's over 60 families, about 120 people, 70 babies, so it'll be a really noisy flight.
They're getting quotes from airlines, but what they really need is an assurance from the government they'll be able to land. For many families, returning earlier simply wasn't an option.
The thought of getting on a plane, I don't think physically I could have done that. I was 8 months pregnant, but my partner's English, my life is here, my work is here. It just, you can't just suddenly click your fingers and go back to Australia.
So what are your options if you're an Australian hoping to leave London? Well, one-way economy fares in early September range from about $2,600 to nearly $25,000. There are some reasonable fares available around Christmas time, but just because the airlines are selling these tickets doesn't mean they'll actually let the passengers on the plane. Booking business or first-class fares can improve a passenger's chances, but many travellers can't afford that. These parents don't need luxury, just a plane to fly their precious cargo home. Nick Dole, ABC News, London.
Hundreds of demonstrators in Argentina are protesting against plans to build massive pig farms to supply the Chinese market. They claim that breeding on such a scale could cause environmental and health problems. Here's Yvonne Young.
Hundreds of animal rights activists marched towards the presidential palace in Argentina, pushing the government to reconsider plans to build large pig farms to cater to the Chinese market. Not only are they against the slaughter of millions of animals, but they say the facilities will damage the environment and their health in the long term.
We are questioning a production model based on pollution, plundering and poisoning of nature and human beings.
100 million pigs will be slaughtered a year. There will be mega pig farms to export pigs to China. China can no longer have these mega farms because of the African swine fever. So obviously Argentina is going to start being the new factory.
Swine fever has hit China's nearly 40 million small-scale pig farmers hard. It's compounded by the government's move to industrialise the sector. 20 years ago, small backyard farms supplied around 80% of the country's pork. Beijing's now aiming for at least 65% from industrial farming operations by 2025. And it's looking elsewhere to supplement its supply. Argentina has been in talks with China to provide 900,000 tonnes of pork in 4 years.
The only thing that motivates them is the incoming amount of dollars that will continue paying a scam like the foreign debt.
Well, Argentina says private creditors have accepted an offer to restructure its debt, allowing it to avoid another default and a messy legal battle in international courts.
When we took office on December the 10th, Argentina had to pay $65 billion by the year 2025. Today, those obligations do not exist. They were postponed for later.
And following these protests, the pig farm deal has also been postponed until November. Yvonne Yong, ABC News.
Well, when Joko Widodo shot to power, he was seen as Indonesia's Barack Obama. The men not only had a similar look, but the same easy comfort with voters. But that's where the similarities ended, according to Ben Bland, who has just published the first English-language political biography of the Indonesian leader. In Man of Contradictions, Joko Widodo and the Struggle to Remake Indonesia, Bland describes Jokowi's rise to power as unlikely as a second-hand car dealer in Pittsburgh, making it all the way to the White House. Ben Bland is also the director of the Southeast Asia program at the Lowy Institute. He joins us live out of Sydney. Ben, good evening.
Good evening, Beverly.
Good to have you with us. Now, you go right back to Jokowi's roots and his business success as a furniture maker. It occurred to me, reading your book, that in a way he's very transactional, his style of government is quite erratic. He's more Donald Trump than Barack Obama, isn't he?
I think it's a bit of an unfair comparison. Jokowi doesn't have anywhere near the narcissism of Trump. He's not as much of a tweeter as Trump. I think he's far more predictable in a sense. And actually, you know, his roots go back to the furniture business, and he hasn't actually changed that much since those days. So he's not a showbiz president in a sense. He's a furniture maker who sees everything through the economic lens, looking for kind of easy solutions to fix the economy. But of course, running Indonesia isn't that straightforward.
Absolutely. You talk that his early philosophy on politics was quite simple. You find out what the people want and then you do it. What do you think stops him from delivering on the reform that he promised?
Well, it worked really well in his hometown of Solo, a city of 500,000 people. He was in Jakarta as governor for a while. It didn't work quite so well there. But once you're governing a country of so many people, thousands of islands, different religious and ethnic groups, and 550 elected mayors or governors, so 550 other Jokowis all around the country wanting to run their own fiefdoms, things get much more complex. And I think he's yet, in his 6 years in the presidential palace, to be able to move things more to the strategic level. So he's still very much that tactical leader, almost like a city mayor in the presidential palace, and he hasn't found a way to bridge the shift quite yet. But at the same time, he remains amazingly popular, which I think is testament to his connection with the voters, despite the policy challenges he's faced.
People were so hopeful for Jokowi because he was seen as an outsider. They really thought he could tackle the corruption and the nepotism that Indonesia has suffered from. But you say he's now an insider. Why was he unable to avoid becoming captive to the political elite?
I think it's a challenge that every outsider in politics faces when they come in. To get power in the end, you have to start making compromises to build a political coalition. You muddy your hands, as it were, and then it becomes very difficult in general. I think what's interesting for me about Jokowi is he was never as much of a reformer as people thought. He was much more the simple city mayor who wanted to fix the small things, but he didn't have a big vision to change the way the political system works, to really root out the corruption, to reform the system. And Jokowi's a guy who's always worked with the powers that be. He's worked with the elites in Solo and then in the presidential palace to make incremental change. So I was personally always skeptical that he would be as much of a change maker as people hoped. But I think his skill politically was in allowing people to think he was whatever they wanted to be. And that's where I think the Obama comparison comes in as well. He also, I think, once said, Obama said that, he was like a blank canvas and he allowed others to paint their own hopes and dreams onto him. I think Jokowi did the same thing, and in a way, like Obama, actually, there's been, in the end, quite a lot of disappointment.
Yes, and you talk a lot about his sort of almost like a short attention span. He doesn't take briefings very well. He sort of doesn't like listening to advice, makes his own decision making. Do you think his inclination is to be more of an authoritarian?
I think under his watch, Indonesia has exhibited some worrying authoritarian trends. There's been an increase in government critics who've been rounded up by the police or targeted. I think that's concerning. But I feel it's more because Jokowi has been thrown off guard by the pandemic and by earlier crises too. And as he's kind of flailing under pressure, he's reached for the levers of power that work. And in Indonesia, you have the military and the police with really deep roots in this kind of authoritarian thinking and authoritarian system, even despite the fact that Indonesia does have remarkably free and fair elections. So I think it's more he's instinctively looking to stay in power rather than a desire to actively dismantle the democratic system. It's more a reflection of his pragmatism and the fact that he's not really interested in democratic principles. When I asked him once what democracy meant to him, he said it means making people's lives better.
Yeah, and it is interesting that you point out that really a lot of the hopes for a full democracy of Indonesia come from outside, that in fact the Indonesians themselves have an acceptance of a system that is very different. They see it as more of a collective, that it is the people sort of pushing forward, a collective type of a system. Is that what holds it back?
I think there is a tension there. I mean, Jokowi in the end was elected twice to be the national leader. And I think he does reflect the tensions in the country, that while Indonesians, I think, really cherish the right to freely elect their own leaders, I think that's a really important victory that was won in the last 22 odd years. I think they're going to keep that desire. But at the same time, they have a slightly different view of what democracy should be. And Indonesia is still a very socially divided country. The economy had been growing before the pandemic hit, but there are many tens of millions of Indonesians in dire poverty without access to proper jobs, health or education. And I think for a lot of people, they see democracy in the same kind of functional terms as Jokowi. This system has to be about what benefits we get, not really benefits, but basic services that we need to survive and move forward. So I think he does reflect that feeling, and also this tension in the Indonesian public where there's always some sort of desire for a strongman solution. While people want to choose their leaders, there's always this sense of maybe it was easier under Suharto in the old days when the boss in charge could just get things done. So I think there is a natural tension there, and it's not all Jokowi's fault. He's reflecting this kind of historical contradiction that goes back, I think, to the founding of Indonesia in 1945.
How disappointing do you think it was when he betrayed, I guess is a strong word, but his longtime friend and colleague Ahok, who was the mayor of Jakarta, because he became a target of conservative Islamists? That was a very pragmatic decision that now has seen him really captive to yet another group.
Yeah, Jokowi is the ultimate political survivor. So I think when hit by crises, and we see that now during the pandemic, he tends to wither at first, but he does adapt in his own way. And in the end, he sacrificed Ahok, who was his deputy, and then replaced him as governor of Jakarta to survive. But remarkably, in this very Indonesian way, politics can be very circular. So Ahok has been sort of semi-rehabilitated. He served 2 years in jail after he was convicted of blasphemy, and he lost the re-election in Jakarta. But he's since come back, and Jokowi appointed him as chairman of the state-owned oil and gas company. So in Indonesia, these fights, these disputes in society, they can be very bitter, but somehow there are ways for people to be rehabilitated in different shapes and forms. And I think that reflects, the sort of balance there, that sometimes people from the outside think, oh, there's going to be an Islamist takeover or Indonesia will collapse again. But there's always this balance in society, and the country seems to find a way to muddle through. Jokowi still has 4 more years left, and you hope he does something more than muddle through, given the challenges ahead. But I think at the very least. There's a sense that the country remarkably has stayed together through 75 years of independence and many, many challenges. And I think that's a positive thing. And in fits and starts, it is moving in the right direction.
Yes, it'll be interesting to watch as you say, he plays out that term. A really interesting read. Ben, thanks so much.
Thanks, Beverly.
Well, the relatives of people killed when Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 was shot down over Ukraine in 2014 are seeking damages from 4 men standing trial in the Netherlands. 316 family members have confirmed that they are seeking unspecified financial damages from 3 Russians and a Ukrainian who are at large. 298 people died, including 38 Australians, when the aircraft was shot down by a Russian surface-to-air missile. The process to return sacred rock carvings to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community has begun, but the time taken to hand them back has been criticised. Aboriginal groups have slammed the process, saying they've already waited too long to have the petroglyphs returned.
Aboriginal rock art known as petroglyphs were taken from a beach in Tasmania's far northwest in the 1950s. Some of the carvings, which are thousands of years old, have been kept at Launceston's Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery.
These rock carvings are hugely significant to the Aboriginal community, and it's particularly important and vital, in fact, that they are returned in a timely manner to where they were taken from.
The process to hand them back to the Aboriginal community is a step closer. In June, the Launceston City Council voted to return the petroglyphs and has now lodged a formal permit application to hand them back. They hope to return them within weeks, but that's frustrated Tasmania's Aboriginal community.
There's no need for a permit. There was no permit used to remove these items from Premingana 70 years ago. There's no need for a permit to return them.
The Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery in Hobart has also submitted an application to return petroglyphs. They've had large rock carvings in its collection since the 1960s.
It's our heritage and it's our decision to make. It's not the decision for councils, museums or for a state government minister.
Well, that's obviously something for the state government then. The act is not our doing. It's in place and we always believe that we need to follow the right procedures, and that's what we've tried to do.
The permit applications will be assessed by Aboriginal Heritage Tasmania. If approved, the petroglyphs will be taken back to their original location in the far northwest. Damien McIntyre, ABC News.
New Australian research has found honeybee venom rapidly kills 100% of an aggressive form of breast cancer cells. The potentially groundbreaking study was conducted at Perth's Harry Perkins Institute of Medical Research.
It's a significant discovery that researchers hope will lead to the development of a treatment for triple-negative breast cancer, for which there are currently no effective targeted therapies and which accounts for 10 to 15% of all breast cancers.
We found that the venom from honeybees is remarkably effective in killing some of these really aggressive breast cancer cells at concentrations which aren't as damaging to normal cells.
Dr Duffy harvested honeybees from hives at the University of Western Australia and compared them to honeybees from Ireland and England. The bees were put to sleep with carbon dioxide and the venom extracted and injected into the tumours. She says a component of the venom called melatonin, which was synthesised, is what had the killing effect.
What melatonin does is it actually enters the surface or the plasma membrane and forms holes or pores, and it just causes the cell to die. And we found that it was interfering with these main messaging or cancer signalling pathways that are fundamental for the growth and replication of cancer cells.
The melatonin was also used in a combination with existing chemotherapy drugs and found to be extremely efficient in reducing tumour growth in mice.
I think it's incredibly exciting that they've made this observation that the molecule melatonin can actually affect the cancer cells, but it can work in combination with other drugs which come from natural products as well. And in combination, they're really knocking these cancer cells on the head.
Dr Duffy does not want to use words like groundbreaking or cure yet, stressing this is just the beginning and a lot more work needs to be done.
There's a long way to go in terms of how we would deliver it in the body and looking at toxicities and maximum tolerated doses before it ever went further.
But the humble honeybee could bring hope to millions. Nick Perpich, ABC News.
There have been celebrations for panda twins on their first birthday at a zoo in Germany. To cool off from the European heat, the cubs were given a special frozen cake made out of beetroot, apples, sweet potatoes and bamboo in the shape of a number one. The creation was garnished with a portion of snow from the zoo's penguin house. Meng Zhang and Meng Yuan were the first pandas to be born in Germany. They're on loan from China. At birth, the cubs weighed less than 200 grams. 12 months later, they're both checking in at 28 kilos. Look at them. Well, when it comes to home crazes, Australians have fallen from McMansions to tiny houses to everything in between. But one southern Queensland couple has now gone a step further. They've lived in a converted World War II bunker for the past 30 years, and they wouldn't have it any other way.
Deep in the bush near Miles in southern Queensland, an unusual structure is nestled into the landscape.
I live in an abandoned underground bunker, the same as this one.
Julie Hines has called a bunker home for more than 30 years.
It was abandoned in 1956, rebuilt in 86, and it's been empty for 30 years. Can't believe it was empty for so long.
Not much to look at from the outside. Inside is another story.
OK, come on in. Home sweet home. Good to be home again. I'll put the kettle on. You got time for a cup of tea?
The bunkers were built as part of a little-known RAAF base near Miles during World War II. Made from 10-inch thick concrete, when they were abandoned, many farmers around these parts used them to store hay. The Hines went a step further.
This is where we started from, Peter. There were no doors, no vents, no nothing much, just imagination at that stage. But it's been great fun. This is the same size as the one we live in. It's a good open plan. It's got bedroom, bathroom, kitchen and sitting room and dining room, or a lounge room really, and an office, which used to be a children's bedroom, but now it's an office.
At just 12 metres long, it can be a tight squeeze, but Julie Hines wouldn't want to live anywhere else.
Right. They're wonderful, aren't they? No, well built, and all hand-mixed cement. Very privileged to have found it and to be in the position to have bought it when we did. Wonderful. Had great fun.
Peter Gunders, ABC News, Miles.
Well, the last members of the AFL Travelling Road Show have officially left Victoria, headed to Queensland in expectation of an announcement about the grand final. Geelong's Gary Ablett and Richmond's Shane Edwards led the player departures with their families, while CEO Gillan McLaughlin accompanied staff from headquarters. An announcement about where the grand final will be held is expected tomorrow. The Gabba is the hot favourite. It would be the first time ever outside Melbourne.
Recommendation from the Commission to the Commission has been accepted, but there's stuff to work through clearly then today with the Victorian Government and the relevant bodies, and hopefully we get there, and then we're looking forward to completing it tonight or in the morning.
Even the Premiership Cup left Melbourne today. All players, staff and their families were quarantined for 2 weeks. In cycling, Australia's Caleb Ewan has won the third stage of the Tour de France. The 198-kilometre stage from Nice to Sisteron ended in a bunch sprint, with the riders battling strong headwinds. Ewan timed his run perfectly over the final metres, claiming the fourth stage win of his career.
He ducks right inside Peter Sagan along the barriers, changes direction again. That extra kick up and over, and comfortable in the end over the top of Sam Bennett.
I'm so happy to get another win and prove that last year wasn't just a fluke, and that I hope to come back in more years and keep winning.
Frenchman Julien Alaphilippe has retained the leader's yellow jersey. In tennis, number one men's seed Novak Djokovic has cruised through the next stage of the US Open. The three-time champion dismantled Bosnian Damir Jumhur in straight sets, 6-1, 6-4, 6-1. And former women's champion Naomi Osaka opened her campaign with a win over compatriot Masaki Doi, 6-2, 5-7, 6-2. The 22-year-old is using her matches to campaign for Black Lives Matter.
It's quite sad that 7 masks isn't enough for the amount of names, so hopefully I'll get to the finals and you can see all of them.
There are no crowds at this year's event, but fans and families are being shown on screens. All right, a quick look at tomorrow's weather. Brisbane will be partly cloudy, a top there of 24 degrees, mostly sunny, a maximum of 25 in Sydney. Canberra, mostly sunny and becoming windy. A late shower or two in Melbourne, very windy, 21 degrees the maximum there. 17 degrees the top in Hobart, also becoming windy and partly cloudy. Another last sunny day for Adelaide, a maximum of 19 degrees. Showers for Perth, 19 the top, sunny in Darwin, and 34 degrees the top. Our top stories tonight. Hong Kong's pro-democracy activists are calling for a boycott of the island-wide COVID-19 testing blitz, suggesting DNA could be collected and misused under the cover of testing. Beijing is staying silent over the arrest of Australian journalist Cheng Lei. And South Korean prosecutors have laid new charges against the convicted heir of the Samsung empire over his role in a 2015 merger deal. And that is the shape of your world this Tuesday. If you'd like to see more world news and interviews, do take a look at the ABC's YouTube channel, and there'll be more news after the break. I'm Bev O'Connor. I'll see you tomorrow night. Bye-bye.
Economic growth. Live performance. Women have been great role models. His family had never lost hope. Contains the genetic material.
We are one, but we are ready.
Just wanted to tell everyone in the hard lockdown that they've got so many people thinking of them.
I'm sending Melbourne a lot of love.
Extend my heartfelt thanks and best wishes to you all.
You're a hero to me. You're protecting people like my 76-year-old mum, and I can't thank you enough.
We're all in this together. Stay safe.
You're not alone.
We are one.
It's going to be tough.
Hang in there.
Please be safe all.
Stay strong, my friends.
ขอให้รักษาตัวเองให้ดีๆนะคะ แล้วก็ขอให้โชคดีด้วยค่ะ จะเป็นกำลังใจให้ค่ะ
और इंशाल्लाह ये सही हो जाएगा.
Keep your positive spirits up. There will be better days ahead, Melbourne.
You'll always be remembered as a legend.
We are Australia.
Somewhere deep in space is a planet similar to our own, yet oh so different.
I can't help wondering why Trump is so concerned about TikTok.
President Trump believes in you.
Join Chaz and John as they transmit their fascinating discoveries.
And you can't escape the politics of this pandemic.
And hunt for intelligent life.
Never a dull moment.
On Planet America, tomorrow 9:30 on ABC and iView.
Tuesdays, we're here to brighten up your night.
Of your love's like the warmth from the sun, and this will be our year, took a long time to come.
We have to fight to save Planet A.
We'll take you on a delicious trip back in time.
I'm going to get on the sauce to quench my thirst for knowledge.
And I meet some amazing Australians.
Share your Tuesday nights with us on ABC.
Come along with me, won't you?
All my family is saying, what is it like to be out there? I say it's not easy.
Danzel Baker's incredible journey from Arnhem Land to the world stage.
I dreamed of doing this and I'm doing it.
Kurt Fernley's 1+1, Thursday, 9:30.
Welcome to the new decade. 1910s, here we come.
This decade is like slave labour.
Who puts an egg in coffee? It's time to celebrate.
You look beautiful.
Yay for 1910, I say.
Bit raunchy?
Scandalous.
But for the Pharaohs, trouble lies ahead.
World War I has officially begun.
Just promise your mum that you'll come back.
I don't know how those parents lived through that time.
Further back in time for dinner, next Tuesday, 8:30 on ABC and iView.
We'll be here to care for you.
Online war. Facebook threatens to block Australians from sharing news content. Parliament signs off on the JobKeeper extension with payments reduced by the end of the month. Students and diners, the latest to be caught up in Sydney's growing coronavirus outbreak. And home is where the heart is, bunkering down in one of Australia's more unusual dwellings. Hello, Michael Tetlow with ABC News. Australia's 17 million Facebook users could soon be blocked from sharing news on the site as the social media giant muscles up against proposed new laws. The government wants to force Facebook and Google to give Australian media companies a cut of their digital advertising revenue. Political reporter Jay Norman explains.
This is world leading.
He's written his own headline on a story about saving news journalism as we know it.
Nothing less than the future of the Australian media landscape is at stake with these changes.
But heralding an assault on the world's biggest tech titans was always going to be an uncomfortable place to stay, as Josh Frydenberg's discovering.
Hey Google.
A month ago, he unveiled a regime to make Google and Facebook pay Australia's commercial media companies when their news content's placed on the two global digital platforms.
Bringing the world closer together.
But digital empires aren't built on giving up money because governments tell them to. Facebook's threat, a news ban, or in its words, to reluctantly withdraw the ability of publishers and people in Australia to distribute news on Facebook and Instagram. Google's made similar threats about services the search giant provides for free. So who's bluffing whom?
We won't be bullied, no matter how big the international company is, no matter how powerful they are, no matter how valuable they are.
But their popularity gives Facebook and Google enormous power. 19 million Australians use Google search every month. More than 17 million access Facebook, slightly fewer on its picture-rich platform Instagram. And not just for searches and social catch-ups. A third of Australian consumers get their news from these behemoths for free, which makes for digital destruction of the advertising market traditional media companies thrive on. In 2018, Google Australia scooped up $3.7 billion. Facebook just under $2 billion. Just how much of that ends up in the hands of commercial media companies is subject to negotiation. The government's dismissed Facebook's threats as coercion. Equally, the tech companies appear determined not to roll over and set a costly precedent for other countries to follow. Something we'll have to give.
Jay Norman reporting. The federal government is scrambling to find out why an Australian TV presenter working for Chinese state media has been detained in Beijing. Cheng Lei has been held by authorities for almost 3 weeks. The high-profile news anchor is a mother of 2 children who are both in Melbourne with her family. China correspondent Bill Birtles reports from Beijing.
My name is Cheng Lei. I'm a TV anchor based in Beijing, China, and this is my story.
Cheng Lei epitomised growing ties between Australia and China. In this video promoting her university education in Queensland, the high-profile anchor spoke of how it helped her land a prominent role in the heart of China's political centre.
The beauty of an Australian education is not about what is taught, but more about what it doesn't teach. It doesn't teach you to just follow orders. It allows you that freedom to think for yourself.
Now, as ties with China unravel, many fear politics is at play in her arrest. For weeks, rumours have swirled as she not only lost contact with friends, but her presence on state TV's social media was purged. The government's decision to confirm her detention is a sign hopes of a quick and quiet resolution have faded.
Does the government know why she's been detained?
I'm not in a position to go into that. We, as I said, will continue to provide the consular assistance that we can to her through the proper processes.
Chung Lei is a prominent figure in Beijing's Australian community, regularly hosting social and embassy events and mixing with the business community. Under China's so-called residential surveillance, investigators could potentially detain and interrogate her for 6 months without charge. In previous highly sensitive cases, lawyers have been denied access. Another Australian detained in Beijing currently, Young Hung Jun, has endured 19 months behind bars without a single lawyer visit. Chung Lei's 10 and 8-year-old children are with their family in Melbourne. Her family issued a statement saying, "In China, due process will be observed and we look forward to a satisfactory and timely conclusion to the matter." Late today, a government spokesman claimed she knew nothing about the case.
China is a country with rule of law. Everything is handled in accordance with law. If you want to get more information, you can ask competent authorities. I have nothing to offer here.
Friends here in Beijing are in disbelief that this funny, social and down-to-earth woman they know could be accused of anything serious. Many wonder if she's caught up in the middle of a diplomatic spat as an Australian working at Chinese government media. But this is still hugely embarrassing for China's government, detaining one of the faces of its own propaganda channels. Bill Birtles, ABC News, Beijing.
The JobKeeper wage subsidy is locked in to continue beyond the end of the month, but at a reduced rate. Parliament's approved an extension of the payment, currently supporting 3.5 million workers. That number will drop to just over 2 million people from late September, and so will the amount they receive, falling by $300 to $1,200 a fortnight for full-time workers.
The passage of the legislation tonight is going to give confidence and certainty to millions of Australian workers and provide hope for our economic recovery.
JobKeeper is now set to wind up at the end of March next year, and by then will have paid out $101 billion. Tens of thousands of New South Wales driver's licences have been exposed in a major data breach. The source is yet to be made public, and there are calls for the responsible agency or company to own up.
The cache of files was discovered online in an open cloud-based folder late last week by a cybersecurity consultant overseas. In it were more than 100,000 files, including the front and back images of about 50,000 New South Wales drivers' licences, as well as tolling forms.
It's pretty concerning because of the identity theft worry. And it's just that the fact that for all of us, every time we've gone in and had to verify identity, driver's licences are one of these pieces of strong identity assurance information.
The data openly showed the faces, names, dates of birth and email addresses of thousands of Australian drivers. It's not known how long the information had been sitting there for anyone to see.
Well, the concern in terms of who might have viewed it is that we just don't know. It's open data. It could be accessed by anyone with an internet connection.
Transport New South Wales says it was not their data, with early indications from the state's Privacy Commission suggesting a private business held the information and left it online unsecured.
Service New South Wales is still looking at all those issues, and as soon as I have an answer, as soon as the Minister or Service New South Wales has an answer, we will obviously disclose it to the public.
While reporting such breaches is recommended, it's not mandatory.
We absolutely need disclosure, so we need to know who was it that exposed this data.
There should be a mandatory requirement for them to notify people whose information has been leaked.
Anyone who believes they could have been impacted can apply for a new licence number online. Josh Bavis, ABC News, Sydney.
More than 130 Year 10 students at a Western Sydney school are in mandatory isolation. They're all considered close contacts of 3 children who've tested positive to coronavirus. And the growing CBD cluster has forced a Newtown restaurant to close and its diners to isolate. Here's Ashley Raper.
The race is on to contain the spread of COVID-19. A Thai restaurant in Newtown has been shut down, the cleaners called in, and all diners there on Friday night ordered to isolate immediately. Less than 2 months ago, the state suffered one of its biggest outbreaks at another restaurant, the Thai Rock at Wetherill Park. 116 people ended up infected. today the doors reopened.
Very, very tough road, but we soldiered through and got there. We've gone above and beyond implementing costly, if you like, protocols.
The closure of its Time for Thai has been caused by a case connected to the CBD cluster. There are 7 more cases linked to that outbreak, taking the total to 41. They include 2 more workers at the Redham Early Learning Centre in Linfield. It remains shut and all staff and children have been ordered to isolate for 14 days. St Paul's College at Greystanes also remains closed. There are 3 more cases at the boys' school. That's 6 infections in total, and all Year 10 students are being forced to isolate. Another Western Sydney school, Girraween Public, has been shut this afternoon after a case surfaced there. Overall, there have been 13 new cases recorded in New South Wales. All their sources can be traced. The Premier's attention today was on a source of contention, the closure of the state's southern border.
My heart goes out today to anybody who's experienced any kind of stress.
From Friday, restrictions will ease, allowing anybody who lives within a 50-kilometre radius of the border to move freely between the 2 states.
Gladys Berejiklian reluctantly closed the border, having railed against states which had previously implemented that policy. Once it was done, it created a political headache right along the border with Victoria, but the Premier isn't willing to take all the blame. It has been difficult for us to get information on the other side of the border about rates of testing, community transmission, and that has in part led to our angst about how we can move forward.
But the Premier still can't say when the southern border will reopen to everyone. Ashley Raper, ABC News.
Victoria's coronavirus case numbers may be improving, but there's concern about declining testing rates. The state has reported 70 new cases and 5 deaths. James Hancock reports.
A flight from Melbourne to Brisbane has sparked a coronavirus scare in the Sunshine State. On board was former Mongol Shane Bowden.
This person is COVID positive and was COVID positive whilst in Victoria and has provided, it would appear, has provided untrue information in relation to the border declaration pass.
The 48-year-old was at the centre of a violent bikie brawl on the Gold Coast in 2006. He's now in hospital being treated for a gunshot wound to his leg. His journey has sparked a testing blitz in Queensland, but authorities here had little to say.
We have no information about an infectious individual getting on a flight.
Victorian police are being kept busy clamping down on a small but growing anti-lockdown movement. A 21-year-old man has been charged with incitement over this protest on Sunday at Roxburgh Park in Melbourne's north. 5 other protesters have already been hit with $1,600 fines. 2 men have also been charged with incitement for planning similar action in central Melbourne this weekend. Police have warned they won't be putting up with it. With the Stage 4 finish line in sight, following the rules is as important as ever.
We will be close to single digits at mid-September.
But he's worried about a massive drop in the number of tests being done, from more than 40,000 a day last month to just over 10,000 today.
That's not enough. I know there's more respiratory illness out there.
The government has begun meeting with industry, union and community groups to thrash out its post-lockdown plan. 2 roadmaps are now being promised, one for the city and another for regional Victoria.
There will be phases that will be dependent on viral numbers, and that there are some industries which will open more quickly than others.
The fitness industry is worried its reopening may be delayed.
If it's stage 2, that'll be disastrous for our sector, and many more businesses won't be able to reopen at all. They will become basically commercially unviable.
This is all about making sure that the sacrifice, the pain, the amazing work that Victorians have done counts for something.
And the hope of a close to normal Christmas. James Hancock, ABC News, Melbourne.
Prison officers have struggled to quell inmates rioting at a high-security Queensland prison after staff couldn't deliver basic services during the coronavirus lockdown. Prisoners at Arthur Gorrie Correctional Centre in Brisbane lit fires and smashed windows after 5 days locked in their cells.
These prisoners have been confined to their cells for days on end. Around them, the aftermath of a riot born of frustration.
Reasonably small amount of prisoners are involved in this sort of riotous behaviour.
Over 2 days, a dozen inmates at Arthur Gorrie smashed windows, threw rubbish, flooded their cells with water and lit fires.
There was 2 prison inmates that were overcome by smoke inhalation.
It was an apparent protest at the deteriorating conditions in an overcrowded prison with staff shortages.
I think at the heart of this is the fact that people feel very, very disaffected at the fact they've been locked away for significant periods of time.
The prisons had to fill the void of more than 400 staff who were stood down last week for coronavirus testing after 2 officers were linked to a COVID-19 cluster. Prison sources told the ABC of problems delivering essential services, including meals, medication and removing rubbish from cells.
Of course we're concerned for the welfare of prisoners and our prison officers, but they're managing that well.
The prisoners' legal service says jails are struggling with COVID-19, but the lockdown raises human rights concerns.
5 days without any outdoor time when you're locked in a concrete cell with nothing but a kettle and a sink and a toilet and a bed is quite a horrific prospect for any one of us.
Queensland's prison boss says an urgent influx of staff today meant prisoners could start to be given time outside.
To give them some respite from the 4 walls of a prison cell, and I'm very comforted by that. And I think that that will reduce the temperature.
The prison's calm again for now.
We're in a 14-day isolation period. Currently we're at about day 4, and so this has got a fair way to go.
Josh Robertson, ABC News, Brisbane.
It's been found former AFL identity Danny Frawley had been suffering from a crippling brain disorder before his death last year from countless head knocks he suffered throughout his career. Frawley's sudden death prompted calls for broader discussions about depression in men. His family and players are hoping the finding will bring greater awareness of a disease that affects athletes around the world. Elias Kluwer reports.
When Danny Frawley died in a single vehicle crash last year, it shocked the football world. Many were questioning why Spud, the lovable larrikin, was living in a dark depression. Now family and friends could have an answer.
Nothing will ever take away the pain of not having Danny around, obviously, but it probably makes a little bit more sense.
The Sports Brain Bank in Sydney studied the brain of Frawley and determined he suffered chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. The first athletes diagnosed were American footballers who played in the brutal NFL. Legendary ruckman Graham Polly Farmer was the last AFL player to be officially diagnosed.
CTE has 4 stages. Stage 1 is the most mild form of CTE, whereas stage 4, the brain of a CTE sufferer looks exactly the same as someone with Alzheimer's.
It's caused by continuous blows to the head, common in 2 of Australia's favourite pastimes.
The limited research to date suggests that it is that exposure to these smaller hits. So, constant knocking in training.
Sean Smith is best known for taking one of the marks of the century. He believes he has CTE.
I mean, there's times where I've been driving home and I've just taken the wrong way home and I'm going to sort of get lost.
But there's more concerning symptoms that have come from a career of head knocks.
The main thing, well, I didn't notice, but my mum did and friends said it was my mood.
When here's the head clash.
Many contemporary players are also affected. Kobe Stevens retired at just 27 and former number 1 draft pick Paddy McCartan had his career cut short due to blows to the head. In the NRL, Timari Martin retired this year due to a brain injury. Former players want the leagues to step in.
The diagnosis of CTE, I think, it will ring true with a lot of people that it is real.
Danny Frawley was a champion footballer, but his legacy could transcend the game. Elias Kluwer, ABC News, Melbourne.
Australians stranded overseas by coronavirus are still facing cancelled flights and exorbitant airfares in their attempt to return home. So some new parents in London are planning to charter a plane so their newborn children can meet family in Australia. Nick Doll reports.
Meet 4-month-old Cullen, 4-month-old Ailish
And Charlie, who's just 7 weeks old. They're just a few of London's lockdown babies, and now their Australian parents want to introduce them to their families back home.
You're being robbed of so many just incredible memories of her that you want to share with your family and you can't. This is my daughter Ailish.
When Kylie McCrossan posted this video to social media, she soon realised she wasn't alone.
Outside of all of the babies that we'd like to take home, there are so many Australians still in London at the moment who can't get home.
Australia's caps on international arrivals have turned air travel into a virtual lottery, with thousands of passengers competing for the right to return. Melbourne's not accepting any arrivals. Sydney only allows 350 per day, while Perth, Brisbane and Adelaide each have a weekly allocation of around 500. So Kylie McCrossan's started a campaign to fill a charter flight with young Australian families.
65 people registered, so that's over 60 families, about 120 people, 70 babies, so it'll be a really noisy flight.
They're getting quotes from airlines, but what they really need is an assurance from the government they'll be able to land. For many families, returning earlier simply wasn't an option.
The thought of getting on a plane, I don't think physically I could have done that. I was 8 months pregnant, but my partner's English, my life is here, my work is here. It just, you can't just suddenly click your fingers and go back to Australia.
So what are your options if you're an Australian hoping to leave London? Well, one-way economy fares in early September range from about $2,600 to nearly $25,000. There are some reasonable fares available around Christmas time, but just because the airlines are selling these tickets doesn't mean they'll actually let the passengers on the plane. Booking business or first-class fares can improve a passenger's chances, but many travellers can't afford that. These parents don't need luxury, just a plane to fly their precious cargo home. Nick Dole, ABC News, London.
Coronavirus lockdowns brought Australia's television industry to a grinding halt, and there are concerns local content might disappear from our screens as a legacy of the pandemic. As advertising dollars dried up, the federal government threw commercial TV networks a lifeline, suspending quotas on locally produced shows.
Neighbours, everybody needs good neighbours.
It's been 35 years since Neighbours first aired on TV screens. The company that makes the Aussie soap warns it could be under threat.
I think in the free-to-air environment, Neighbours most certainly could be at risk if the quotas were to change.
Current rules state 55% of content shown must be Australian, but other quotas relating to drama, children's shows and documentaries have been suspended, and the lobby group for the TV networks wants them scrapped for good.
These rules are a bit like stepping into a time machine back into the 1980s. That's when most of the rules that we're currently living with were dreamt up.
Over the past 20 years, Suzanne Ryan has produced 19 children's shows.
We're in production now, but we don't know if we will have any production next year.
Australia's Small Business Ombudsman says 86% of screen production is done by small companies.
Literally thousands of those businesses go under if the government doesn't make it really clear now that the current suspension of the quota system won't go beyond the end of the financial year.
The wider economic loss could also be severe. The sector is worth about $6 billion to the local economy and creates about 50,000 jobs each year. There's also a cultural benefit in telling uniquely Australian stories to the rest of the world.
Communications Minister Paul Fletcher will decide later this year whether to reinstate the quotas or extend the pause. Unless a balance is found, homegrown content could disappear from our screens.
You call that a good salary? I want to be effluent, Mum. Effluent.